In our previous video, we began discussing how to write the body of the independent writing task, including how to write topic sentences to connect back to the thesis of the introduction. We also analyzed how to organize a body paragraph. Once again, we need to remind you that the TOEFL Quick Prep download provided by ETS does not include a sample independent writing task, so we're using a different one for this video series. So again, thinking about the writing process, which we discussed to great length in the previous video, we started by discussing how to plan before we write. We discussed various ideas of brainstorming and mapping so that we can start thinking about our topic a little more deeply. Then we talked about writing the introduction, how the introduction usually contains a hook, which is to get the audience's interest, and of course developing the very important thesis, which we'll be revisiting in this video. In the previous video, we talked at great length about writing the body. Generally, the body on the TOEFL contains at minimum 2 paragraphs, and each paragraph would generally focus on a different reason. Each paragraph shows how it connects to the thesis by using a topic sentence to introduce the reason, and each topic sentence begins with an appropriate signal word to show how the paragraph fits into the overall essay. We talked at great length as well about using personal examples that help make the idea in the body relevant. Now, relevant, as we discussed before, is how it relates to the essay topic. We want to choose as an example and ideas that relate very well. We also want to make sure that we choose ideas that are logical, that they're supported by other information in the paragraph, and that they make sense. And then, of course, we also discussed thinking about organization, how we can connect the personal example to the reasons that were being used. Now, again, this was just a suggested organization in which we start with the topic sentence, begin with the personal example, and then include supporting details, connect it to our main reason, thinking again about additional supporting details, and finishing with a concluding sentence. So as we progress through the paragraph, we kind of follow this basic organization. Now, of course, you can go about this in many different ways. You don't have to follow up with a personal example, but I felt like a personal example helps to provide you with a more concrete way of thinking so that you can specifically think about how this example connects to the reason you're trying to make. Now, as we've indicated in our previous videos, the essay format in general follows this particular organization, that we begin with an introduction, we follow with the body, and then we have a concluding paragraph. Now, we've been focusing specifically on the body, and the idea, of course, is that the body contains those reasons, and generally at least 2 paragraphs. And speaking of the paragraph organization, we started with a topic sentence, and then finish, of course, with a concluding sentence. Now, once again, our topic is the team sports versus individual sports topic, and we decided to focus on team sports in our response. So if you recall, I basically kind of laid out in the previous video how to think about organizing the topic sentences and how they connect to the thesis. Now, the topic sentence, again, is the first part, so we talked about the value of teamwork. We followed with a personal example, provided some supporting details. Then we decided, how can we connect this to our main reason, which is the real world? We often said that the TOEFL, even though they ask particular questions about everyday life, they really want to see how you can connect ideas to bigger topics. So again, thinking about real life or the real world. We provided supporting details for that particular idea, and we provided a concluding sentence. Now, this is an important opportunity to talk about the concepts of cohesion and unity. Now, let's first talk about cohesion. Now, cohesion generally is when we use signal words to show how ideas, words, sentences, and even paragraphs, how they relate to each other. We can also use other cohesive devices, such as synonyms or repeated or rephrased ideas, to connect information together. Now, we talked about both of these in the TOEFL reading series, so it's good to see that these ideas are coming back because we need to use them in our writing. And really, a good TOEFL essay includes many examples of cohesion to show how these ideas connect to each other. So we're going to go back for a moment and take a look at our sample paragraph that I've been working, our sample response that I've been working on. So first off, let's think about how we use cohesion to connect the topic sentences to the thesis. So again, you'll notice that in the thesis itself, we discussed that we're going to learn some lessons of how team sports are much more valuable than individual ones. Well, again, as we noticed, lesson is kind of the first idea of how we're connecting. We mentioned in the previous video that the word lesson connects to lessons, and that teamwork, in this case, is showing how it connects back to the word team. So we're using signals here, first lesson, and we're also using a word teamwork, which is synonymous with team sports, or at least in this case it is. So the idea is we're showing how we can connect the topic sentence to the thesis. Same thing in the second example. We talk about the word the second lesson. This particular cohesive device or signal word shows us that we're continuing the idea and discussing these other lessons that we were going to talked about in the thesis. So using good signal words can show how the ideas you're including in the body can connect to the thesis. So again, using sequence words such as first, second, next, and so on. In addition, even using similar or even the same words in the topic sentence as there are in the thesis can help promote cohesion. Of course, this is what we talked about with, what we're going to talk about with synonyms as well. So we repeated the word lesson, which connects back to the word lessons in the thesis. Now let's take a look at how cohesion how we're going to demonstrate using signal words inside of a body paragraph. How can we connect ideas from inside of the paragraph? Well, first off, look again at the signal word we use in the topic sentence. So we said the first lesson. So the idea is our expectation is that is going to give us an idea as to what are we going to be discussing throughout the rest of the paragraph. So this kind of tells us first that this is the first idea of a sequence. Now, of course, I chose this one to go first because I thought this one was perhaps more important. But in general, a sequence does not always have to be steps in order of importance, or even in terms of which comes first or which comes next. This is just one that I chose to go first. So in this case, I could easily say one lesson instead of the first lesson. But the idea is that it gives us an idea. Okay, well, first we're going to learn about this lesson here, and then later we might learn about another lesson in the rest of the essay. So sequence signals often help control the ideas that are going to follow. Now in the topic sentence, that signal again, the first lesson, indicates that the whole paragraph will be about this idea. Now we call this a controlling idea. So this type of signal is going to control the direction of the rest of the paragraph. So in the sentence, since it's called the topic sentence, it's going to tell us what the topic is for the rest of the paragraph. And that idea was the value of teamwork. So we consider this kind of the controlling idea of the topic sentence. So you notice how it's kind of talking, the entire paragraph is talking about teamwork in the sports sense. Now the next signal word helps to indicate how we're going to connect the lesson of teamwork to the idea of sports, which is, of course, what the topic is discussing. I use the idea of as the point guard. As kind of connects or compares or links ideas from one idea to the next. So this is kind of indicating that this is going to be an example of teamwork. Now, examples are very helpful on the TOEFL. In fact, you'll probably be using example signals quite a bit. But they help accomplish two things at the same time. They connect to the idea that came before it, and then they are followed by information that is usually more specific than the information before the signal. So in our topic, the example helps to choose a more specific idea to illustrate the more general one. So again, playing as a guard helps to illustrate the more general concept of teamwork. Generally, this is how example signals work. They get more specific than the idea before it, and they help connect to it. So again, the idea here is, I'm using this picture here of candy to help us think about that this is kind of the general idea of teamwork. So notice how I'm going to pull out one example. So think of this piece of gum here as it's unique. Obviously, it's different from, say, a Lemon Head or Necco wafer or a Jolly Rancher, but it's part of the same idea of candy. So what I want you to think about is oftentimes we use examples to illustrate a larger, more general idea. This idea here, the guard on the basketball team, is just one example of a large body called teamwork. This is how example signals work. So the idea is helping connect this to the larger idea. Of course, we can use cohesion when connecting paragraphs together as well, not just ideas inside of it, but also when we have to develop two paragraphs. So if you recall, in our example, we had to divide our paragraph, our reason into two separate paragraphs because we felt like we had too much information. Well, if you notice, I've highlighted the words much like and as well. So these particular comparison signals, much like this, helps to indicate a similarity between the two ideas. So even though we're moving from one world, which was sports, to another, the world of work, the ideas are still similar. If you recall, that was my point. I felt like sports oftentimes can help teach us about what we're going to discover later in life. Now, of course, we can use other phrases as well. So, for example, the phrase as well, which means in addition, or in the same manner or way, equally. So the idea is comparing ideas oftentimes shows us the similarities between them. So, what this really indicates is that these two paragraphs are connected to each other. We haven't really left the idea made in the previous paragraph. So what we're saying is the controlling idea of teamwork, which was described in the topic sentence of the first body paragraph, is really directing this paragraph too. So again, paragraphs are fairly flexible. Generally, we want to focus on only one idea in a paragraph. So this particular concept where we can divide our ideas into 2 or 3 different paragraphs, it's perfectly fine as long as we know that one paragraph is being kind of following the other. So what do we notice so far? Well, again, signal words are very important to this idea of cohesion. They help show a kind of logical progression of the ideas in the essay. So in our sample body, we were able to show this progression by demonstrating how the first body paragraph relates to the thesis, and how the second paragraph builds on the first body paragraph. So again, to kind of summarize, our thesis was lessons why the team is better than the individual. In the first body paragraph, we said teamwork by using an example of playing a point guard on the basketball team. In the second body paragraph, we continued the value of teamwork and connected it to something bigger, the real world of work. So notice now that these two paragraphs are basically working together. But remember, paragraphs in general are flexible. We can use them to kind of define many different things. So in this case, when we talked about that the TOEFL is a minimum of 2 paragraphs, well again, that's just the minimum. In this case, because I wanted to connect one idea to something bigger, but that they're both still relating to the value of teamwork, I just felt it was better to divide them into 2 paragraphs. And I think that's perfectly fine. Now, another idea of cohesion is focusing on synonyms and how we can also use repeated and rephrased ideas. So the idea here is to take a word, perhaps either use the exact same word, or perhaps to rephrase it a slightly different way. So we're going to look at our 2 body paragraphs again, the ones that we've written so far, and see if we can find some repeated, rephrased ideas. So here are the 2 paragraphs again. Notice how I use the words team, teamwork, strengths and weaknesses, and of course the word to know, and how I kind of refer to those exact same words in the second paragraph. I talk again about teamwork. I talk again about team. Now, of course, on the first body paragraph, team was focusing on basketball. Here, I'm talking about working in a team and a business. Strengths and weaknesses of the players on the team, and the same thing here. So the idea here is I'm showing how these two paragraphs can connect to each other using other cohesive devices, not just signal words, but also rephrased or synonymous words, or even the same words. Now, of course, synonyms are the other idea. And again, a synonym is kind of thought of as a substitute, especially if we're thinking about the right context. Now, synonyms are especially helpful when writing an essay, because one problem is students often just repeat themselves. So synonyms can be very helpful so we don't just keep repeating over and over. Now, let's look at our two body paragraphs again. Do we see any synonyms? Again, we identified words that were the same. But notice how I also use some words that kind of are synonymous. For example, the word value of teamwork I rephrased as the word valuable. So even though these two words are basically coming from the same word, they're not exactly the same. I had to rephrase it a different way. I put different players on the team. I put other people or members. And of course, teammates is very similar to the idea of members as well. When I needed, and I also need. Again, similar roots, but different, kind of slightly different phrasing. Now this brings us to a very important point, something we discussed in the speaking section as well, and that is the importance of using good vocabulary. We talked about the importance of avoiding those words we called the blah words. Remember, blah words were words that were not very interesting or too general. But I think this is even more important in the independent writing task, because really good writing does depend on using a variety of ideas and words to express yourself. I mean, truly, you're going to be expressing yourself in a much bigger way than you did in the speaking section. So I think this is a great time to play an activity we're going to call Synonym Wars. So, here are the rules. In this activity, you're going to see a series of fairly common words, also known as the blah words. Your objective is to identify two synonyms of these words as quickly as possible before the 10-second time is up. So we're going to take a look at an example, and you will have 10 seconds to identify two synonyms from the list of words listed on the screen. Are we ready? Let's try an example. Okay, time is up. So did you find two synonyms? The answers are perceive and comprehend. So the purpose of this activity is to get us to recognize that instead of using these fairly general words or words that we use every day, sometimes it's good to try something new, to utilize some new vocabulary, at least something interesting. Now, of course, we want to make sure that we understand how they're used. But in this activity, we're just going to see if you can identify some other words that might make our writing a little more interesting. So now, let's play. So once again, to remind us of synonyms and rephrased ideas. Again, I do think that organization of this task is still very important. But in my opinion, the essays that receive the higher scores are the ones that use the more interesting and well-written ideas. And I think, to me, this most closely connects to vocabulary. Using good vocabulary words can really help make up for a lot of other problems. As long as the essay is interesting and uses good words, generally you'll get a better score. So keep in mind, synonyms, of course, are rarely perfect substitutes. Many word uses depend on the context they're in. So keep in mind that just because a particular word may have more than one synonym doesn't mean that it can be used in any situation. Oftentimes students look in dictionaries or thesauruses to see how they can expand their vocabulary. But the problem is sometimes words may have general meanings that are similar but aren't necessarily good as substitutes. For example, if you remember in our game, the word retain was a synonym for keep. But you wouldn't be able to use it as a substitute in the idiomatic expression keep in mind. In this case, you couldn't say retain in mind, even though keep and retain have a similar meaning. So the idea is obviously expanding our vocabulary and using words we know. That really helps in making an interesting response. But keep in mind, translating from your language or just using substitutes may not necessarily make sense. Now let's move on and talk about the idea of unity. Now we talked a lot about signal words and how they often can help connect ideas. We also discussed repeated, rephrased, and even synonymous ideas. So by using these, we're showing how really the ideas are connected together. Now, since all of the sentences in the paragraph are talking about the same idea, so we talked about that teamwork was controlling the paragraph, we need to make sure that we're using words and sentences that all relate to that concept. And this is kind of a strong sense of unity or togetherness that we see throughout the essay. Now, if there are sentences or even paragraphs that don't belong, well, this can complicate your point and confuse the reader. So, let's try another activity. This activity we're going to call reunify. Now, in the basic idea is you're going to see a paragraph from an essay. The objective is to think about which sentence or sentences are not unified with the rest of the ideas in the paragraph. Now, this paragraph was adapted again from an excellent textbook by Anne Hogue called The Essentials of English. So if you haven't gotten this book yet, I would highly recommend it. So take a moment and look at this paragraph on the screen. The topic of the paragraph is how to meet people. And I want you to pay particular attention to how, again, in this one paragraph, how the topic sentence needs to control the rest of the paragraph. So the idea is you need to find the sentences that don't necessarily relate to that controlling idea. And, of course, also that don't relate to the sentences that come before or the sentences that come after it. So what I'd like for you to do now is pause the video and read this paragraph very quickly. When you're ready, return to the video and we'll discuss which ones don't belong. Okay, well, here we go. So as we're looking through the paragraphs, let's see which ones don't belong. Did you find the first one? Well, the first one here relates to the idea of the British psychologist. The idea here is that the topic is about how walking a dog helps you meet people, not necessarily about about the psychologists themselves and where they live. So in this case, the fact that she lives near the university, that's not really relevant to the rest of the ideas in the paragraph. So in this case, this does not help promote unity in the paragraph. The next one, the scientist didn't use cats or other pets. Well, that might be interesting to know, but again, the idea was about dogs and their effect, not necessarily other pets. So in this case, we can eliminate this sentence too. It does not help promote unity throughout the paragraph. So the concept of unity. So again, thinking about using a picture to help us, look at this chocolate bar. Notice how all of the pieces themselves, okay, kind of together represent the collective idea of our essay. So, in other words, even though each idea we can kind of break apart, we're all kind of relating back to the general controlling topic that we kind of discussed in the thesis. So what I want you to think about is when we break away a piece, this is sort of like the body paragraph. It kind of resembles the rest of the essay, but it's also distinct and separate. So again, what I want you to think about here is that even after we separate it, we can still recognize that it relates to the rest of the essay. But we can also recognize at the same time that it is separate. So again, notice how they all look kind of similar, but we can also break them apart. Now, if we break it up into smaller pieces, now think of this as representing sentences. Again, they are unique and distinct, but they also still belong to the idea in the paragraph, and of course to the idea in the rest of the essay. So I hope this visual image kind of helps a little bit. The importance of unity is we want everything to talk about the entire essay. But as we look closer and closer, we also want everything to be relating to the paragraph that it's in as well. So if we break it into even smaller pieces, then of course we have words. And even the words, while they're unique, still need to be part of the same idea. So the idea I hope you're understanding here is that everything needs to basically be around the idea of the thesis, and of course focusing more specifically on the paragraph, the sentences, and even the words that we choose. Now, of course, on the TOEFL, we said you don't have a lot of time to go back and edit and revise your essay. So it is important to make sure that as you're writing, try to stay on topic. If you feel your paragraph is getting too long, and this happens sometimes to students, especially the first paragraphs when they're spending a lot of time writing, then you might want to consider the following ideas. First, you want to make sure that you don't have any unnecessary words, ideas, or sentences. You also might want to consider, like we did, dividing the idea into two paragraphs, especially if you're trying to move from your personal example to the reason you're trying to make. So what have we learned so far? Well, in order to be cohesive in our essay, we need to use appropriate signal words to help the paragraphs and sentences flow together. We should use synonyms, rephrased ideas, or even repeated ideas to help connect information together, especially to connect the topic sentences to the thesis and to connect ideas throughout the rest of the body. If we want our essay to be unified, we also have to recognize that every body paragraph is somehow relating to the thesis. It's either directly or by connecting to some other body paragraph. Again, just like we did in our sample, we divided our first reason into two separate paragraphs, but both were relating to each other and of course also relating to the thesis. Make sure that every sentence in the body paragraph is talking about the controlling idea that we discussed in the topic sentence. So for example, we discussed teamwork in our first reason, so we wanted to make sure that every sentence somehow related to the idea of teamwork. And of course, then we also want to make sure the words we choose are appropriate. This of course is very difficult, but as long as we stay on topic, then you probably won't have a problem. So once again, thinking about those unity and controlling ideas, think about how the thesis, now the thesis of course is almost the ultimate controlling idea. It controls the whole essay. And then how each topic sentence from each paragraph, especially the topic sentences that are describing the reasons, how they also connect to the following paragraphs that come after it. So again, think of the thesis as the ultimate controlling idea, and it controls the topic sentences. The topic sentences, in turn, will help control the paragraph or even paragraphs that follow. And of course, they will control the words and sentences that are even inside of the paragraphs as well. So as we said before, the thesis kind of determines the direction of the whole essay. Of course, it needs to be general enough. Remember we said that that's important. We don't want the thesis to be too specific. That's the purpose of reading. But the other thing to think about now is that the topic sentences are kind of like mini controlling ideas. They belong to the thesis, but they are also going to control the more specific arguments that you find in the paragraphs. So in our team sports example, again, this kind of gives you hopefully a better visual idea of what we're discussing. We've been talking a lot about our first reason, and that topic sentence, reason number 1, was teamwork. Our first paragraph talked about basketball and how that taught about strengths and weaknesses, and then we also connected it in the second paragraph to talk about teamwork in the real world. Now, you will see in the later, when we finish the essay in a later video, you will see that the second reason we talk about the value of humility. Now, humility is talking a lot about recognizing that you don't know everything and that you need other people to help you. And I said that's one of the reasons why I think teamwork is better than individual sports, or team sports rather, because I can learn from other people. So why? Well, because the reason here is that we have to know when to ask for help in the real world. We can't do or know everything. So as you can see, all of them relate back to that ultimate controlling idea, why team sports are better. And of course, if we need another body paragraph, we will kind of add information if necessary. So, keeping it under control. As we mentioned earlier, a paragraph is unified when all of the sentences and ideas in it are largely talking about that controlling idea. And again, this is true of all of the essay. All of the body paragraphs need to be discussing their own many controlling ideas in each of their topic sentences. When developing your body paragraph, we have to make sure to understand which ideas are going to help your argument and which ones are not so helpful. In addition, make sure the arguments you're trying to make are following the controlling idea of the paragraph. So we're going to demonstrate with an activity that I like to call Don't Lose Control. So the rules of this activity is we're going to see a topic sentence, and then we're going to see some supporting sentences from a body paragraph. You need to help decide which sentences follow the controlling idea of the topic sentence and which ones are not relevant and therefore should not be included in the body paragraph. Now these sentences are going to come pretty fast, so see if you can guess correctly before we move on to the next sentence. Once again, this activity was adapted from Anne Hogue's textbook, The Essentials of English. So let's try an example first to make sure we understand what we're doing. So at the top of the page, we have the topic. Japan is a nation of workaholics. Now quickly we see here's a sentence that we're going to use somewhere in the essay. Japan has more national holidays than the United States or Germany. So does that help or hurt their argument? Well, in this case, it hurts the argument. The idea that there are national holidays does not actually help prove anything about workaholics. In fact, it's the exact opposite. So in this case, we're not going to use this example. This example is not relevant. All right, now let's play. And of course, try not to lose control because we're going to be moving pretty quickly. Here we go. The average worker in Japan gets 18 days of paid vacation every year. Does it help or hurt? The answer, it hurts. It doesn't belong to the topic. Here's the next one. The average worker uses only 9 of his or her 18 days of paid vacation every year. It helps. Many Japanese are uncomfortable taking vacation days when their coworkers have to be at work, according to Japanese sociologists who have studied the problem. It helps. Okay, so keeping in control. Don't lose focus. Even if the sentence you want to write seems to help your argument, make sure that it doesn't change the focus from one idea to another. So please make sure that all of your ideas stay on topic with the controlling idea, or the reader may get lost. Now, we've discussed a lot about the common paragraph organization, but now we're going to take a look a little more specifically at the final idea of the body paragraph, the concluding sentence. So the conclusion to the body paragraph helps contribute to the unity of the paragraph, and you'll notice how it will help us connect back to the topic sentence of the paragraph itself. I think it also helps to remind readers as to what that controlling idea of the topic sentence was, and to reinforce the point you're trying to make. So notice in our conclusion, playing on a team sport helped prepare me for this valuable skill I would need later in life. Now notice the concluding sentence didn't actually come until the second paragraph, but that's okay. The idea here is that it signals that the idea is finished. That first lesson that we discussed earlier, how the two now connect back to each other. So notice how they connect. The first lesson was teamwork and then playing on a team. So notice how I kind of rephrased the idea. And I noticed there was a valuable skill. Well, that was discussed throughout the essay itself, throughout the paragraph, or the paragraphs. So notice how the conclusion basically rephrases the controlling idea in the topic sentence. The valuable skill and the value of teamwork. So notice that's what the conclusion can help you do. Connect the ideas together. And notice how it also summarizes the reason. Teamwork is required in the real world of work, which, remember, that's what the paragraph was talking about. So a good concluding sentence will repeat or rephrase the controlling idea of the topic sentence. It will help summarize or revisit the main reason of the body paragraph. We can also use signal words to help begin the concluding sentence, though it's not always necessary. So you may want to use something like all in all, or in summary, or to conclude. Of course, you'll see these words again when we talk about the conclusion, the concluding paragraph of the essay. But these are also words and ideas that might be helpful in summarizing or wrapping up an idea you're discussing in a paragraph as well. So all of these expressions may be helpful when you're trying to conclude a paragraph. The concluding sentence can also make a suggestion as the natural result of the ideas brought up in the body paragraph. You might want to consider using a result signal, such as a result, consequently, therefore, or for these reasons. But one thing we need to keep in mind, don't repeat the topic sentence word for word. That just makes it look like you don't have enough vocabulary to express yourself. Introduce a new idea in the concluding sentence. Don't do that either. That's what the topic sentence of the next body paragraph is for. Again, the conclusion is to help end an idea, not introduce a new one. So our final activity in our video is to think about how to come up with a conclusion to each paragraph. So this particular activity we're calling In Conclusion. So here are the rules. You're going to read a paragraph, but it's missing its concluding sentence. You need to choose an appropriate conclusion from a list of possible concluding sentences. Now remember, a good concluding sentence is one that rephrases or repeats the controlling idea in the topic sentence without repeating the entire sentence, and one that summarizes or revisits the main reason of the body paragraph. Once again, we've adapted this activity from the Essentials of English Handbook, written by Ann Hogue. So, let's take a look. I'm going to give you a moment to look through this essay, through this paragraph. The topic is about giant pandas. And then I'm going to give you some sample concluding sentences, and we need to figure out which one or ones seem to meet all of the criteria we established for a good concluding sentence. So now, pause the video and take a moment to read the paragraph. When you're ready, return to the video, and then we'll begin. Okay, so now here we go. So choice A. In conclusion, giant pandas are an endangered species and may soon disappear from the earth. B. In short, zoos must acquire more pandas, or this much-loved species may soon disappear from the earth. And finally, C. It is clear that zoos must find a ways to help pandas reproduce, or this much-loved species may soon disappear from the earth. Now again, all three of them contain some similar ideas. The question is which one or even ones may be appropriate to meet all of the criteria we established for a concluding paragraph, a concluding sentence. So which one do you think you're going to choose? Take a moment and look at the three choices and then see if you can figure out which one fits the best, or even which ones. Okay, let's analyze them. So in A, we talked about giant pandas are an endangered species and may soon disappear disappear from the earth? Well, first off, it's good in that it uses that signal word we talked about, in conclusion. It's also good because it revisits the main reason of the paragraph, that the species may soon disappear. However, it's bad because it repeats the topic sentence almost exactly word for word. It's also bad in that it doesn't really summarize the whole paragraph. Remember, the concluding sentence needs to connect to everything in the paragraph, not just to one idea. So in this case, we're probably going to drop A as a choice. Okay, now let's look at B. Well, once again, it's good because it uses a signal word. It's good because it summarizes the main reason the species will disappear. But it's bad in that it's not logical or even relevant. Nowhere in their essay does it really reference the fact that zoos must acquire more pandas. So the key here is that zoos are not even discussed. Remember, the idea is not to introduce any new ideas in a concluding sentence. Now let's look at C. Okay, well, it's good because it uses signal words. It's good that it summarizes the reason the sea species will disappear. It's good that it suggests a result from the ideas mentioned in the paragraph. First off, it mentions that species reproduction is on the decline. So not just picking up or purchasing or acquiring, rather, new pandas, but they must help them reproduce. That was an idea mentioned in the paragraph itself. So in this case, it looks as if C is going to be our best choice. So now let's see how the sentence fits back in the paragraph. So again, notice it talks about how they were trying to reproduce pandas at the particular zoo. And starting with the middle of the paragraph, 2 pandas were born in the San Diego Zoo. But then notice the next sentence doesn't talk about acquiring new pandas. It, again, focuses on the idea of captive pandas are not reproducing well enough. So in this case, it follows from a conclusion that zoos must find a ways to help pandas reproduce. It's connecting back to the previous idea in the paragraph. Whereas the other choices, again, address the main reason of the paragraph, but didn't necessarily fit into the actual idea of the paragraph itself. So again, that's kind of the challenge of writing a good concluding sentence. It needs to kind of fit with the ideas before it and also connect back to the controlling idea in the topic sentence. So our final thoughts on the concluding sentence, we need to make sure that we include one. But I think one thing I will kind of just emphasize now, that the concluding sentence is probably not the most important part of the paragraph. But I have noticed that the essays that receive the higher scores are the ones that most likely include all of the ideas we're talking about in this video series. And again, in the links below this video, you will see a link to sample essays that ETS has evaluated for us. And you will notice that the essays with the better scores contain almost everything that we're discussing throughout this video. So just to kind of wrap up the idea of concluding sentences, they help bring a sense of closure to the paragraph, but they also help prepare us for the next transition, either to another body paragraph or the final concluding paragraph of the essay, which is what we're going to conclude with, so to speak, in our next video. Once again, lots of great materials out there for you to use. And again, I've added the information of Anne Hogue's The Essentials of English, which again I would highly recommend as a very helpful book for students. It includes a lot of grammar information, writing information, and of course, specifically for us, how to write a good essay. So I would really recommend that you check out that book and its workbook as well. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time for Part 5, Finishing the Task.